Hi, Parker.
Hi,
Thank you so much for joining today.
thank you for having me.
Let's start at the beginning. I want to hear all about your food journey. So, when did you first get interested in food?
As a young boy, no, I'm kidding. I've always eaten food, but when I really started my health journey, I would call it, was probably 6 or 7 years ago, and I have some autoimmune conditions that introduced me to the power of food as medicine. Started with gluten free and just learning how food interacts with your body, and it was really powerful unlock for me. And so that was the toe in the water, which became a full jump into the water of food and the power of it and how it can impact your body.
So, what autoimmune conditions do you have?
Psoriatic arthritis, in addition to some other minor ones, but that's the one that gives me the most issues.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So, if you don't know much about our podcast, it's focused on type 1 diabetes. And so, most of
Hmm.
my listeners live with type 1 diabetes, which is an autoimmune condition. So, similar, where unfortunately we were all diagnosed randomly and all of a sudden now have to manage our blood sugars every day. So, everyone here in the audience knows exactly about autoimmune conditions. Unfortunately, a lot of us also live with multiple, like Hashimoto's, thyroid
Mm.
issues, and things like that, celiac disease. I mean, all of them. So, we understand what you're going through and appreciate all you've done so far. So, when did you start working at General Mills?
Yeah, so I was worked at General Mills for about 6 years. In those times, worked on everything from Yoplait to Nature Valley to Cheerios to Totino's pizza rolls, which is probably the product that broke me because that's barely food. And so my health journey kind of coincided. I would say my first few years there, I wasn't on my health journey yet. And then once I started learning more about the food as medicine, started to try to change it from within and create products that were better for you with better ingredients. And obviously, at the end of the day, they're going to protect the billion-dollar brands that make a ton of money and use very cheap ingredients and are designed to get you to eat a bunch of it. So when my daughter was born, was really sort of what I call my Jerry Maguire moment, right? Like, what am I doing? How can I be doing something to actually make a difference? And at that point, I left to go create what ultimately became Lovebird cereal, but really started with the mission of cleaning up junk food and helping kids. And so that manifested into a clean ingredient cereal. Cereal is the number one breakfast for kids. I think it's not news to share with anybody that it's usually not made with the best ingredients. It's usually super refined grain, which essentially impacts your body like sugar, and then also a lot of refined sugars as well. And so wanted to create something with resistant starch from cassava to help balance some of those spikes, but also remove a lot of the fake stuff that just added into food that doesn't need to be there, whether it's food dyes, natural food dyes like artificial food dyes, or artificial and natural flavors that can hide a bunch of things. And especially in the news recently around natural flavors using maltodextrin as a carrier, it's harder than ever to know what truly is in food. And so that's why I put all the ingredients on the front of the box, because I was so tired of seeing something that was gluten free or seeing something that was organic and then flipping the box and seeing the ingredients were just as bad as the conventional products. And so wanted to make it super easy for anybody to know what's in the food, and also raise awareness to have people read the ingredient statement, because that's really the birth certificate of the product, right? Like, don't believe all the marketing claims on there. I think the food and the nutritional facts panel is where you should go and kind of get your information, not a leprechaun telling you that they're magically delicious.
Exactly. Because I know the food in cereals has not always been like this, right? Like over time, they started adding in extra additives and things like that. So when you were at General Mills, was that already in there, or did that happen while you were there? And that's when you started seeing these like changes happen?
Most of it was already in there. I think there's been a bunch of great, quasi documentaries or shows about the origins of cereal and how they came to be. It's quite a rabbit hole to go down, but essentially the Kellogg's brothers created it, and it was really meant to be, a health food, believe it or not, with like their granola that eventually turned into cornflakes, that eventually turned into frosted flakes. And so they just kept adding more and more sugar. And I think our grains in general across the country have been commoditized and industrialized, where monocrop agriculture has created something that has less nutritional value, and a lot of these cereals went from whole food flours to these super highly refined flours that are isolated starches, which are essentially just blood sugar spikes without any of the fiber and things that balance it out. So when I was there, all of that's kind of been written. I think the history of cereal and the history of food in general is very interesting to see how even candy bars used to not have all the junk in them today that they do now. It still was sugar and chocolate and things like that, but it was, half as many ingredients and a lot more whole food ingredients in general. So when I was there, what's interesting, right, like was right around the time when Trix took out artificial food dyes and used natural food coloring, and then that business declined by 50%, and then they had to add them back because consumers stopped buying it. So when you actually think about why people buy, or especially kids buy Fruit Loops or buy Trix, it's because they have super bright colors, right? You take the colors away, kids don't want to eat it anymore. So those are kind of the decisions you get confronted with at a big food company, right? Like, I've been in meetings where it's like, should we put mermaids or unicorns on this sugar filled yogurt? And like, I think that was one of my last meetings there, and I was just like, I don't like, this is not what I want to be doing with my life, right? And I think a lot of these big businesses, right, like they're not evil people. It just, you follow the incentives is what I always say, right? Like they're incented to grow their business, they're incented to grow their share of stomach or how many people eat their product. And so if that's their incentives, like you would do everything to make it as cheap as possible, make it as tasty as possible, and make it as attractive as possible to people to get them to eat it. And I think food companies have more of a responsibility, not just to be compliant, but to set the standard, because obviously it's impacting our health. I saw some stat the other day that 38% of 12 to 19-year-olds are now pre-diabetic, which is insane and not normal. Obviously, there's a difference between type 1 and type 2, but the food is impacting our kids and the food is impacting our bodies. And you've seen it with the rise of even celiac disease with the heavily processed grains that we put in our body. And so the wheat that we grew up eating historically is very different than the wheat today, or even different than the wheat you would eat in Europe. And so I think for me, it's just a cereal box, but for me, it represents so much more, and just a vote to change our food system, use ingredients like cassava that comes from small family farms versus, these gigantic industrial companies that are just creating a ton of corn and wheat and oats that are subsidized by our government. So probably a little bit more than you wanted as an answer, but I can talk for quite some time about it.
No, that's great. And you're right. I've heard about the prediabetes increase. And I mean, that's not the only one. All the autoimmune conditions are increasing. I mean,
Mhm.
even for mine. So type 1 diabetes is tend to be caused from a virus of some sort killing your pancreas. However,
Mm,
I'm like, I still think maybe some of the food that I ate when I was little contributed to it. I don't think necessarily it was the main cause, but I
mhm.
also now have a gluten sensitivity. I have Hashimoto's. And so I'm like, all of these are related in some way. And I also didn't start learning about the food industry until I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. I mean, I ate everything under the sun before this. And now I've started to get into food as well and learning a lot more about the health things around food. So I totally understand. And we appreciate what you're doing. By the way, I absolutely love the cinnamon one. It's my favorite of your cereals.
Happy to hear. Happy to hear. And I think you raise a good point, right? Like, I think the baseline level of inflammation has just increased in all of our bodies, right? And some bodies are overstressed. It's food. I think most people's food journey or health journeys start with food, but then you quickly realize it's also mental, it's also stress, it's all of these things. And stress to me has been one of my biggest triggers, right? Where I can eat the perfect diet, but if I don't process stress correctly and I'm not a great communicator and keep things bottled up, and if I'm not expressing how I feel or communicating, that triggers a lot of stress for me. So like food is definitely the cornerstone of all of it, but there are other factors involved. And I think that baseline level of inflammation has just gone up astronomically. And that's where you see a lot of these autoimmune and chronic diseases pop up and are accelerating. Literally everything is growing. And it's not just better diagnosis, these are fundamental shifts in how we eat and what we eat and the food available to us.
When did the Lovebird actually start?
Ooh, feels like 50 years ago. We've been around for, I always track it with my daughter's age. So she's 5. I left a year after she was born. So we've been in market for about 3 years. And so I have a 5-year-old in kindergarten and a 3-year-old business. But it's been an amazing journey. And I mean, I think people like yourself and those listening have been hungry for change. And, I think I was too, and created Lovebird. And really this community of people that are just tired of being told what to eat, or the options that are created by these big companies want a different option and something with better ingredients that are as close to the earth as possible, from the earth as possible. And with Lovebird, I've been very intentional to keep it a 100% family owned business. Like, my intent is 100% not to sell out. Like a lot of these other brands, their only goal is to raise a bunch of money and then go sell to Kellogg's, to sell to these big companies. And I think for me to really realize the vision and mission of Lovebird, we have to be independent, because that's the only way we can drive real change. Because as soon as you take money or want to be acquired, you start making the same decisions that a big food company would, right? Like the cassava I use is over double the cost as a typical cassava, because it does come from regenerative organic certified farms in Nicaragua, where they also do a lot of education and help them become business owners themselves. And so, I think that's the fundamental shift of our food system that needs to occur, versus just making something flashy in a box and then selling it to some big company in 5 years. So that's absolutely what I don't want to do.
Right. And it's like a lot of the foods now are basically just marketing companies. They're not food brands, where you're trying to actually grow a food brand, which is great.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you mentioned how food has changed, like the actual ingredients have changed. But if you ever are able to see an old photo of what grocery stores used to look like, packaged food used to be a very small portion of the grocery store or market, and all of the packaging was pretty bland. It was just like a name stamped on the front, and not all these cartoon colors. Like, I can't even walk down the cereal aisle with my daughter because it's like a cartoon show. It's all of these animated characters popping up. And there's been some legislation effort in other parts of the country, I believe Mexico, where they actually took off the animated cartoon characters off of Frosted Flakes, etc., because that's, I think, pretty predatory. And there's a ton of research done on this in terms of how big the eyes are. Are the eyes making direct eye contact with kids? And I've been a part of those research activities in my former life, and they're designed to get kids to notice and to get kids to want it. And they do these brand equity partnerships with Frozen or Mickey Mouse, and it just, there should be greater regulation, or just not allowed to use some of these cartoon characters on products that are not good for kids. So that's why Lovebird's packaging is the way it is. It's super bland and simple design and muted earth tones. So, some people get it. Some other people will tell me to put, a monkey on the front of the box for their kid. And it's just not what I'm trying to do. And, I think parents should be making the decisions for their kids. I don't, it's literally a big food marketing tactic to drive kid ask, which is to make the packaging or the advertising effective enough that when you go into the store, your kid's pulling on your sleeve and it's like, mommy, mommy, daddy, daddy, I want that. I want that. And I don't really think that should have a place for our children, right? Food decisions should not be made based off of cartoon characters.
Absolutely. Wow. I had no idea that they actually target the kids themselves. I mean, it makes
Yeah.
sense. Like
I mean,
all the designs, but I never really thought about it in that depth.
yeah, it's like, it's a literal strategy. Like, how can we drive kid ask? How can we get kid to ask mom to buy this product? So it's, a lot of people like will say, well, everybody, you don't have to buy Fruit Loops. You're not forced to buy Frosted Flakes, but we exist in an environment where it's impossible to avoid it. There's subsidies that are making the corn and wheat and soy and oats very cheap. So, for example, wheat is probably 30 cents a pound. My cassava is like $2.50 a pound, right? So, like, that's the price difference between something that's regeneratively agriculturally grown and organic versus something that's mass farmed, right? And when you mass farm it, you lose a lot of nutrition. It's not just, oh, it's cheaper now, so it's better. It's actually less nutrient dense. And so these commodity crops are so cheap, the cartoon characters are so vivid, and the sugar content is so high and the types of sugar are designed to get you to eat it. Like there's this whole world I've dove into of around maltodextrin and all these different types and variations and isolated types of sugar that are designed to get you to overeat. Like a gram of maltodextrin is not the same as a gram of even cane sugar. It's designed to like trigger cravings and appeal to different parts of your brain. So like if you just go back to the incentive, it's like, how can I, like, if your incentive is how can I sell more, not hey, what should I be selling, what should people be eating, that's where you get a disalignment and an improper balance of incentives and health outcomes that through Lovebird, and again it's a box of cereal, but for me it's much more, is hoping to make a difference and kind of tip those scales. So it's been people like yourself in the community that have grown Lovebird. Like I have blown away by the people that care much about their food, and not everybody does, but I think with certain things happening now, like more and more people are being aware of what is in my food, like what is in that box, like what does it do to my body. And hopefully with that awareness becomes more people making conscious decisions about what they eat.
It's so sad because a lot of families, I feel like they want to be choosing healthier options. They just don't even know, right? They walk down
Mhm.
the aisle and they're like, well, I trust the food brand to be giving me a healthy option. So I'm just going to buy these Fruit Loops or Cinnamon Toast Crunch or whatever because they think it's healthy for them. So it's not even the family's fault, really, which is why, by
Mhm.
the way, I love your social media, your Instagram account, because I love that it's all focused on just like better, not even your brand always. It's you're promoting other brands too that are the better options. So I think that's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, for me it's not just about selling Lovebird. It's for me about just raising awareness. And if you feel like Lovebird's a great fit for you or your family, that's fantastic. And I genuinely hope that any competitor copies what I do, because I want better food in the market. I want a higher level of awareness for people to make their own decisions, right? Like I think that when people have full information and full transparency, almost everybody's going to make a better decision for themselves, right? And I think we exist in a market today where there's not full transparency, or there are cards or decks that are loaded that are stacked against you, and it's harder than ever to be healthy. Like I don't, all the chronic disease we mentioned, some of it is not necessarily something you particularly did. A lot of it is lifestyle related, but it's been harder than ever to live a healthier lifestyle with the bombardment and saturation of social media, but also the junkification of our food, of processed food, right? I think for the average American, about 60 to 70% of their diet, of our diet, is ultra processed food. And again, that's a very nebulous term, but typically that's like the most processed food, right? It does not include things like, hey, I processed olives into a jar and sold it to you, right? So I think it's just that awareness, and there's a trade-off of convenience and health most of the time, right? And it just sort of what works for you. And I'm not saying everybody needs to homestead and grow their own food and all of that. And maybe someday that will be more accessible to people, but it just starts with one swap, right? Like it's, as you mentioned too, with your own health journey, it's just like your decisions that you make today, if you choose to have kids or want kids, like impacts them, right? Epigenetics, like what you do today impacts future generations of your family. And I think I was seeing something that like if you exist today, you have about 2,000 ancestors before you that have been making good or bad decisions, obviously good enough to continue to exist and pass the line on, but it's kind of on you to make those decisions for the next 2,000 people and play the long game and not the short game. And so that's sort of, as a parent, when I became a parent, like those emotions were much higher, right? Like, how do I pass on healthy habits to my kids? And how do I raise awareness for other families in whatever way I can so that they can make their own decisions?
We just recently had a daughter in July, so she's 4 months old
Oh,
now.
congratulations. 4 months, you're a pro. I was going to say, you look well rested.
No, no. She's going through a sleep regression right now. So,
Oh,
but to bring up your point, it is true. Like now that I've had her, I'm like, I want to make sure she's eating, the right foods from an early age, and I don't want her to be eating the nasty ingredients that are out there in some of our food brands, unfortunately.
yeah. And I think, trying to think of like a good post eventually to do this, but like everyone's health journey starts in a different spot. And then you kind of wind up in this like, hey, everything's trying to kill me. I don't know what to do. And this kind of paralysis. mindset. And, I've been there as well, where I'm like researching pot or pan or waffle maker. And I'm like, there's, as I mentioned too, like food is one component of it. Environmental toxins are another component of it, but the amount of stress you put on yourself as well. So like, I think the full circle of your health journey is realizing it's sometimes as simple as just eating real food, reading some labels, and avoiding some ingredients you should absolutely not be eating, being mindful of some other ones that are fine in moderation, or just depends on where it's paired at. But just also just food and all of this healthy living is meant for you to enjoy your time how you want to enjoy it, right? It's a means to an end, especially with your daughter and your family. It's like, I want to spend as much time, quality time with them as possible. And eating healthy allows me to be the best version of myself to do that. And if I'm stressed out about every little thing, that makes it difficult to show up as a husband, a wife, a mom, a dad, an uncle, an aunt, brother, sister, whatever your role is in your life. And so I think for me, it's like, hey, I worry about all the ingredients so you don't have to, right? Like, I think I was looking at the budget the other day. I think I've spent probably close to $100,000 on testing ingredients, right? Like, that's an insane amount of money. And I wish I didn't have to do that. I wish the food system wasn't like the way it is. But I do all of that to make sure I'm putting out the cleanest product possible. Because at the end of the day, Lovebird is something I slide across the table to my daughter every morning, right? And if I have any doubt about what I serve her, how can I look you in the eye and sell a box of Lovebird? So I think when your motivation is, what should we be eating? How can we find better? I think it just manifests as something much better. So that's kind of how I operate.
How, when you first started, like, how did you even get your name out there to, like, because obviously you didn't, nobody knew about you when you first started. So did you go to like little events and like, how did you even get started?
It's a great question. I joke sometimes, right? Like, I went from this world of like, hey, business school, big food company, PowerPoint presentation strategy, all the things we talked about. And Lovebird was really just an emotional leap, right? There was no plan really. It was just, hey, I have this feeling, I have these skills. How can I combine those two and create something better? It wasn't, hey, I have this idea, this white space opportunity, and I'm going to go raise money from this venture capitalist or this private equity fund. It was just like, all right, here's all the savings I have. Here's what I want to do. I know I want to control this thing. So I got to start small. And really, just as you mentioned earlier, the Instagram account, right? I literally started cold DMing some of the influencers or creators or people in the space that helped me on my health journey, whether it was Dr. Mark Hyman or Dr. Josh Axe, or even the Food Babe, just people that shared that passion. And I was just like, hey, like, would you like to try this? Like, here's what I'm trying to do. And I think when you operate with authenticity, like, people see that. And even using the word kind of means you're not, right? It's sort of like, I'm really cool. It's like, do you have to say it then? But for me, it was just like, here's my stories, here's what I'm trying to do. I'd just love to send you some cereal or just talk to you about what you think of this. And I think that over time, it's like anyone on your health journey, it's like no one supplement's going to help you, no one new fancy piece of exercise equipment is going to help you. Just showing up and doing the basic things consistently is how you build healthy habits. And that's how I've been able to build Lovebird, where it's just, hey, here's our story, here's what we do. If you like it, great, let's talk. If you don't, that's fine. And just being authentic in that way. So there was no big marketing budget. I still don't have a marketing budget. I think I spend all my money on ingredient testing and donations to fight childhood cancer, and just helping out kiddos in any way I can. So yeah, I mean, I wish I had a better answer for you, but I really don't.
That's a great answer. That's amazing. And I love the supporters because I follow all those people you mentioned. So I absolutely love it. So I'm wondering, because obviously cost is a huge issue for a lot of families, and your cereal is about $8 around there. And what,
Mhm.
like Fruit Loops is 3.50. So what's like what would be your answer to somebody that was wondering, like, why should they buy your cereal over Fruit Loops?
It's a great question. And I think going back to what I said about just the quality of ingredients, and I think if you actually broke down, a pie chart that adds up to 100% of what you actually get in a box of Fruit Loops, about 5% of that is an ingredient cost. So what you're actually paying for is marketing budget, packaging, and a bunch of other stuff that you don't actually wind up eating or affects you, right? With Lovebird, the amount of ingredients you get is like 50%, 60%, right? So you're paying more for better ingredients. And for some people that makes sense. And I get that, $7, $8 for a box of cereal is a lot. I'm a parent, I have a budget too. But for me, I'd rather spend more money on groceries than I would on clothes, than I would on, X, Y, and Z material thing, because I understand the power of food, and I'm willing to pay for quality, and I'm willing to pay for better ingredients. And so that's what I would say. I mean, you're paying more, but you're getting more. You're getting better ingredients. So it's not like you're paying for fancy packaging or for the new Tony the Tiger advertisement that you'll see on TV. You're literally just paying for better ingredients. And so I think it's valid. I hear it. I feel it. I'm like I said, a parent with a budget as well. And for me and my family, like, I will pay more for quality.
I will absolutely too. And it's funny because if you would have asked me this before my type 1 diabetes diagnosis, I would have been like, I'm buying the cheapest product possible. But now that I have all of these issues, I don't even look at prices anymore. I just go for whatever's going to be the best option for me, whether, it's gluten free or whatever, better ingredients. I just buy it now. And maybe I'm blessed in that sense that I don't have to think about it as much. But still, I'm like, to me, just like you said, it's the nutrition behind it that I will pay for, even if it's a little bit more expensive.
Yeah, and I think it's like the old slogan that was like, you either pay the farm or pay the pharmacy, right? And some element of that is true, right? Where the investments you're making in your health now may seem like, hey, it's a couple extra dollars more for this or a couple extra dollars more for that. But those things add up, right? Like, I think with health, it's not one, if you're fortunate, it's not one single event, and it can be, right? But typically with chronic disease, it's like these small decisions add up over time, right? And I'm still trying to reverse all the food I used to eat growing up. I look back at some of those things and I'm like, mom, dad, how'd you let me eat that? But it's just different now, right? Like, the food is worse now than it was. It wasn't, the best thing back then either. But I think there is more awareness around it, and more people not just trusting a smiling cartoon character on a box anymore, but really doing the work and reading those ingredient labels, and understanding what they're putting in their body. So I get it. And I think at the end of the day, you get what you pay for.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's sad because people don't necessarily see the effects happening to them right away, right? Like, so when they eat the
Hmm.
Fruit Loops, they're just eating it and they're fine. But who knows, 5, 10 years down the road is when something might actually come about from eating all of that bad food.
Yeah, 100%. And we're all dealt a different genetic hand, right? Like, that is a factor, but lifestyle, determines what of those genes get activated, and what actually happens to you, right? Like, if, like, I have a family history of heart disease, so I have to be mindful of that, right? And do my research and understand how I can mitigate those factors. And so I think it's just being aware, and then once you're aware, you can make better decisions, and playing the long game is the approach you have to take.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, where can we find Lovebird at? What stores?
Yeah, you can find Lovebird on my website, lovebirdfoods.com. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it at Whole Foods, Sprouts, and we also have a store locator on our website as well. So you can find it across the country. Doesn't matter to me wherever you buy it, whatever works for you, go do it. And appreciate you even thinking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. What's your favorite flavor?
Ooh, that changes. Right now it's the cocoa. Honey's my go-to, but we've really cracked the code on cocoa. My daughter loves the strawberry or the fruity flavor, but cocoa is kind of my late night snack recently.
Okay, I have not had the cocoa, so I'm going to be going to the store right now to get it. Well, thank you so much for tuning in today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you for everyone who's listening.